My first duty as Commander-in-Chief is to defend the United States of America. In doing so, the question is not whether America leads in the world, but how.
Does America, in fact, lead under this current administration? Good morning and welcome to America's Forum for this President's Day. Obviously, that is our current president, Barack Obama, talking about America's role as a leader of this world in his recent State of the Union address. Now, after a weekend of global violence at the hands of ISIS, the question remains, is America leading? And what is leading from behind that the president talked about a while back? For more on this developing story, we're joined by Newsmax contributor John Fund. He's a columnist for National Review Online. He's Skyping in from Washington. Our co-host for this hour, conservative strategist Jack Bergman, host of Behind the Curtain. And both those gentlemen join us from Newsmax, Washington. John, the president says it's not a matter of if, but how America leads. What is leadership in the Obama administration?
It's a mystery. The president says that he's in charge of the situation, but he was the one who was caught completely unaware by the growth of ISIS. He says now that his goal is to degrade and destroy ISIS, but none of our allies believe he has a strategy to actually get from here to there. And I think the president is treading water, just hoping something turns up, and I don't think it will. We see ISIS emboldened. It's collecting more and more money from the oil and other resources that it has to trade on the black markets, and it is continuing to kidnap people, continuing to execute them, continuing to thumb its nose at the world. I see the president saying he's leading, but it's probably leading from behind, which is what he originally said his foreign policy was all about.
Hey, John, Jack Berkman here. I love the way you called it a mystery. Listen, here's my question. It would seem to me ISIS is embedded in urban populations. I want to see if you agree with me. My concern is that Obama is so unwilling to have collateral damage and civilian casualties that he would rather see U.S. troops die going after ISIS. Don't you think what we really have to do is just go in there and bomb and take the collateral damage to get rid of them?
Easier said than done. The president has never shown any indications that he is willing to do that unless drones are involved. For some reason, he has a completely different set of rules and standards for drones. So I don't see the president doing that with our air forces, which means we now have 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 more troops on the ground there. I expect that if ISIS continues to remain a problem and continues to grow, the president is going to inevitably have some ground troop intervention there, because we can't do everything from an air war. We learned that in Vietnam. We've learned that in other conflicts.
And speaking of troops on the ground, a report over the weekend, 4,000 troops headed from Fort Carson to Kuwait. Apparently, the president is prepared in some sense of the word. He awaits an authorization of force resolution from the Congress. John, does he even need that? Can't he continue under the resolution passed years ago by the Congress with a different president?
Oh, this president makes stuff up as he goes along. Look, I'm an old-fashioned. I actually believe our Constitution should matter, and I actually believe that the Congress should be consulted. I actually believe the Congress should give authorization of force. To say that a decade ago they gave permission, I think you need a fresh debate. And of course you don't have Congress run foreign policy. You can't have a committee of 535 to do that. But our system of government with checks and balances should work in foreign policy as much as it can. We should not have an imperial president either at home or abroad.
You know, John, one thing I notice, I'll see if you agree with me, one thing I notice in this, there's a complete absence of diplomacy by the Obama administration. For instance, why isn't he building a coalition the way Bush 41 did during the Iraq War? You even see Egypt now wanting to get involved. It would seem to me it's quite easy to build a coalition. Do you agree that there's just a complete absence of diplomacy by this administration in the Mideast?
No, I disagree. I think the Obama administration is working overtime, and Secretary of State Kerry is working overtime to try to put a coalition together. But you can't put a coalition together if there's zero confidence in the guy at the top of the pyramid, which is the United States of America government. Who would follow this guy? He draws red lines and then blurs them out of existence. He says one thing, does something else. He says he will follow the advice of his generals and his intelligence and then ignores it, withdraws from Iraq completely when everybody in the world said, leave a residual force. Would you follow this guy? Would anyone follow this guy?
No.
If he was going to a funeral, he'd go off course and leave everybody on beside the side of the road.
Well, let's hope the old saying, it's your funeral, doesn't come into use here. John Fund, Jack Bergman, we are going to continue our discussion following this break. So you might say that we will follow Jack and John with more of Jack and John discussing a possible government shutdown. America's Forum continues here on Newsmax TV.
If the Senate doesn't like it, they'll have to produce something that fits their institution. The House has acted. We've done our job. Senate Democrats are the ones putting us in this precarious position. And it's up to Senate Democrats to get their act together.
And what if the Department of Homeland Security funding runs out?
Well, then Senate Democrats should be to blame, very simply.
And you're prepared to let that happen?
Certainly. The House is active. We've done our job.
House Speaker John Boehner yesterday on Fox News Sunday. Welcome back to America's Forum. Let's continue the conversation now with columnist John Fund and conservative strategist Jack Bergman, both of them from Newsmax, Washington. So, John, it appears the Speaker is taking a different rhetorical stance than he was earlier this year, because we heard shutdowns were just anathema and that Republicans would always take the blame. Is the Speaker politically making the best of a bad situation, or is he just laying it out straight?
I think the Speaker is hoping something will happen between now and February 27th when funding for the Department of Homeland Security ends. You know, JD, the problem here is this. There's the short-term goal of stopping the president's illegal executive orders, and there's the long-term goal of making sure you do it in such a way that you preserve your viability to talk to the American people about other issues. The problem with this approach, shutting down the Department of Homeland Security, is twofold. One, the fees that support what the president is doing on immigration come in and are spent by the government regardless of whether Congress acts. So the border fees, the fees you pay at the airport when you fly internationally, that money is still going to come in, and that can fund all of the president's immigration orders. So you're not really stopping him. Secondly,
John, let me ask you this.
The Senate Democrats are not going to vote for this.
Are you concerned that Mitch McConnell may not survive as majority leader? He seems to have a rocky start. He's opposing shutdown. A lot of these new conservatives in the Senate very much want a shutdown, led by people like Ted Cruz. Are you worried that Mitch McConnell could end up out of a job?
Zero chance. Mitch McConnell has complete control of the Senate. It would take a majority of the Republican caucus to depose him. I don't even think that's possible. I do think that Mitch McConnell is in a bad position that he's put himself in, because he himself said the day after the Senate majority was won in November, there will be no government shutdowns. So he's negotiating from a position of weakness, and the White House realizes that. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. The problem is the Republicans are now in a position where I don't see how they get out of this if they have a government shutdown, because the money to the amnesty programs continues to flow. And the Senate Democrats, even though they criticized Obama, 8 of them, for doing this that last December, they're not willing to break with the White House and vote against it.
Well, the other thing we should point out is that shutdown is a bit of a misnomer. John, you just pointed out the money continues to come in for immigration policies that the administration runs, and there are Republicans talking about the fact that you can't have this type of conflict continue, at least in terms of appropriating funds for the Department of Homeland Security. For example, Arizona's senior Senator John McCain, here's what he had to say on the issue.
We cannot cut funding from the Department of Homeland Security. We need to sit down and work this thing out, and there's ways we can address what the president did was unconstitutional, but it's not through shutting down the Department of Homeland Security. It's too serious.
2 minutes remain. John Fund, that was John McCain on Meet the Press. Bottom line is, the Senate going to roll over? Republicans going to roll over again?
I think they've set themselves up for failure, unfortunately. I think a better approach would be to take the appropriations bills that are having to pass now that fund the government, there are 12 or 13 of them, and put in riders and provisions that restrict the president's ability to enact his amnesty provisions. The president can then the president's in the position of either signing a bill and funding the government or vetoing it. So the onus falls on him. A lot of this, JD, as you know, is where do you assign the political blame in public relations? And right now, the blame will fall to the Republicans. I think they have to find a way to shift the blame back to the president.
Well, one way that could happen, this whole notion of illegals voting, we talked about a loophole in the new executive immigration policy. You've got some more info on that, correct?
Well, this is a real problem. There are hundreds of thousands of people who potentially are registered to vote, and we don't know because we don't have complete national records, and they're illegal aliens, or they're citizens who are here, are the non-citizens who are here legally but still don't have the right to vote. Governor Rick Scott in Florida inexplicably is not yet appealing a court decision that ruled that Florida did not have the right to remove illegal aliens and non-citizens from the voter rolls. I hope that he reconsiders, and I hope that he acts on that before the deadline in a few days, because it's astonishing that here in this country you can have judges who claim that it is not the right of the state governments to remove illegal aliens and non-citizens from the rolls. If we don't do that, then we have lost control of our country.
So it looks like Floridians need to burn up the phone lines to Tallahassee to Governor Rick Scott. John
Absolutely.
Fund, we thank you for your time. Jack Berkman, stay there if you would, please, sir. And the rest of you, please stay here, because when we come back, we will be joined by Dr. Ben Carson. Since he may run for president, what would he be doing today were he commander-in-chief? That's all ahead as America's Forum continues.